For most of my dating life, I would constantly get caught up in unhealthy relationship dynamics, seek out emotionally or even physically unavailable people, and seek validation outside of myself. Over the years, I have done some deep work to really transform my attachment patterns. And I've moved from being very anxiously attached and very codependent to surprisingly secure. Today, I'm going to share my story and tell you how I did this, because whether you run from love or you cling on far too much, you can change your attachment patterns too. Hello, my loves. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena, and I'm a somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I support you in bridging the gap between who you currently are or perceive yourself to be and who you desire to be or become. Let's dive into the story of how I transformed my attachment patterns, beginning with the before. So for pretty much my entire life, starting in my childhood, I was seeking validation outside of myself. There were a lot of reasons for this, and going into the specifics of my childhood trauma isn't actually necessary, but my experiences from my childhood and what I unconsciously made that mean manifested or projected out into all of my relationships. It would manifest specifically or mostly in romantic relationships, but I could also see it in academic endeavors, in subtle ways in friendships where I would cling on to a best friend. It's just that in romantic relationships, it would show up the strongest and the clearest. And whilst throughout my life, I would date different people, it was almost like I would date the same person just with a different face, because the pattern would persist. I'd replace the person, but I would end up in the same dynamic again, the same patterns would play out, and it was honestly really exhausting and really painful. And if this is something that you ever experience too, where you essentially end up manifesting the same person just with a different face and a different name, then let me know in the comments or send me a DM on Instagram, because this is such a common pattern and you are definitely not alone. But because I was essentially seeking validation outside of myself, I would attach very quickly in romantic connections. Especially if it was somebody I had to kind of win over or I had to make love me. I would overthink the relationship. I would be completely preoccupied with it. I would attempt to control it. And honestly, I would push people away with this behavior anyway. I was pretty much single for my entire life because I would unconsciously either choose the wrong people who weren't available anyway, or I would self-sabotage and sabotage the relationship and push the people away that were actually good for me. So because of that, it wouldn't ever actually get to the commitment stage. And as it sometimes happens, God or the universe, or however you want to call it, gives you the gift of making a situation so bad that you have no other choice than to look at it. Because one very significant relationship where this pattern ended up playing out the strongest, and that ultimately then had the most significant impact on me, and that ended up being my turning point, was an on and off relationship for quite a few years with a man who was also at the same time struggling with addiction. And the fact that he was an addict was something that I tried to ignore for a really long time. I was very attached to this person. I was very codependent. So the way he felt and how he showed up had a massive impact on the way I felt. And it would keep me in this place of low self-worth because he was very non-committal and he wouldn't choose me. He would very often choose other women over me or a bottle of vodka over me. There was also a lot of deception. There were a lot of lies, which is a classic with addiction frequently. And I tried to manifest things to be different. I tried to ignore what I was seeing and mostly what I was feeling. And I was very much stuck in my mind. I was very disembodied, very disconnected from my body. I was such an overthinker back then. I would overanalyze everything. And overanalyzers and overthinkers tend to often be more anxious leaning when it comes to relationships. They tend to be more inclined to want to control their reality and their relationships. they tend to be more drawn to want to influence or even manipulate other people for their own gain or to soothe themselves. And they often tend to be more drawn to manifestation as a modality as well, or be more inclined to try and control their external circumstances through any means possible. So overall, they tend to be more preoccupied with relationships and with the other person than with themselves, which is exactly what I was like. And I would love to know if you resonate with this at all, if you tend to overthink or overanalyze in relationships or be a bit preoccupied with it or with the other person. So let's talk about the turning point. What made me change, or what made me want to change? Well, first of all, I was stuck. And I knew I was stuck. I would be in the cycle, especially with this man, where it would be so good and then it would be so bad. It was a back and forth that went on for years. I also came to realize after it ended how much I had been living in a fantasy. I'd been living in my head and really trying to uphold an ideal or an imaginative idea that wasn't rooted in reality. I knew I had to change my patterns, but I was trying to will myself to change my patterns or behave or think or feel or act differently. And that's not how it works. If you try to willpower your way through it, of course you're going to come up against resistance. So finally, the relationship really exploded, which was essentially the big wake-up call, because I had to move through this massive heartbreak and I had to see things for the way they really were. So I made a decision. I realized that I couldn't run from this anymore and that what I was actually running from was myself. I knew that I couldn't replace this person with the next person or try to get them back, because the same pattern, the same cycle would just repeat, because it was me. It was me. I was the common denominator here. And deep down, I knew it the whole time, because I was so exhausted from trying. I was so tired. I was so burnt out. I just didn't know how to get out of that cycle. And my self-concept had really been the root. I suddenly saw that I would take my self-concept into every relationship, no matter who the person was. So if I didn't change it, then I could meet the most amazing person in the world and I would still experience patterns that were hurting me and the other person, most likely. I was done settling. I was done playing small. And so this relationship and the ending of this relationship really got me to take a good hard look at myself and do the work to heal my patterns. So how did I actually change these patterns? What were my next steps? Well, the decision was the initiation, really getting sick of my own BS. That was the driver. I had to decide that I was not going to repeat the cycle anymore. Now, obviously, just deciding that isn't enough, because if it was that easy, we would all just change our patterns through a decision. From here, I made some other significant choices. Number one, I got help. I got coaching and mentorship. I poured a lot into healing myself and healing my heart. And this is something that I genuinely recommend to everybody going through hardship, especially heartbreak, because it's so intense. And sometimes it's even better to do that before the heartbreak, because often we don't let our heart break because we're so afraid of the pain that comes with it when we don't have the support to go along with it. So we stay in this attachment and we stay in these toxic patterns, because then at least you don't have to feel it. But getting that external support really helped me get to the root of things, because I had a lot of awareness, of course, of what was going on, and I had a lot of an overview of my childhood, and I had worked on things in therapy, which, to be honest, only helped in limited ways, because awareness is only one element. It doesn't actually create the change itself. So often in therapy, I got tired of talking about things over and over again, and I'm like, okay, but how do we change it now? I talk about this a lot. I have a separate video about this idea as well, and how we need to move on from just awareness and just talking about our problems and actually do the work to transform them. But it helped me to get this outside perspective and to have someone who could see things or point me to things that I couldn't see on my own, because it was too closely attached to my experience, to my identity, to my emotions, to my subconscious. And being able to process and feel it in a safe space already helped me to just change something in me, because the shame couldn't survive. The shame that I carried for my own behavior couldn't survive once I was held in this space. So I really prioritized healing my heart, and I really had to process all of the emotions that were caught up in these attachment patterns, in this particular relationship, in the experiences from my childhood. I had to process the grief and the shame and the guilt and the fear of being alone and the rage of having been lied to and betrayed. It was such a cocktail of emotions, and it always is. Working on your self-concept is always connected to so many different emotions that have been built up for such a long time and that have solidified in your body and essentially created an identity without you even really being aware of it. So from healing that heartbreak, I actually had to dive a lot deeper. I had to resolve the trauma from my past that created these patterns in the first place. And I had to dig real deep into my subconscious for that. And I had to resolve all that deep within my body, within my nervous system, really transmute it and alchemize it. Because doing it through the body was so important for me. And I see this in my clients all the time, how much it shifts for them, because as I said, awareness can only give you so much. And the other issue is that when you're dealing with anxiety, you're often just dealing with overthinking and intrusive thoughts. And yes, you feel anxiety in the body too. Yeah, your heart rate increases and you might be hyperventilating, but you also can't think clearly. You also have all these thoughts coming in and you start to spiral. So it was a big shift for me to move from always living up here to actually knowing how to process everything through my body and rewire things in my subconscious through my body as well. And that's what I now coach my clients through in Recreate Yourself. The method that I teach there, the process that I teach there is very somatic. It's very body-based. It has a very strong focus on emotional healing and trauma resolution and processing, because through feeling and through processing in the body is really how your self-concept gets to transform, how these patterns get to break. Anxious attachment and codependency are really trauma responses where you are attempting to regulate yourself through another person. And so that's why I had to essentially transmute or transform my attachment patterns through rewiring them in my nervous system, creating a whole new sense of safety in my nervous system. I go a lot deeper into resolving attachment patterns and everything that it takes to release attachment and create new healthy relationship patterns in a free masterclass that I did a while ago. It's called Liberate. If you send me a DM on Instagram and let me know that you'd like the free replay for it, I will absolutely send it to you. It's a long process and it can be a tough journey. For me it was, but it was and is really rewarding because it completely changed my life. It is such a common experience, and I've worked with so many clients over the years that have very similar patterns, that had very similar experiences, that was stuck in anxiety and overthinking and anxious attachment. And you do really get to resolve it. One of my current clients, for example, she came to me when she was very attached to an ex-partner. I remember she wanted to actually have him back. But through the work on her self-concept that we did together, through the structured method and approach that I taught her and that I guided her through, she resolved these attachment patterns within her. She came out of this reborn. She came out a completely new version of herself. And she now has forgotten all about this man. And she called in a really beautiful relationship that she says is far better than she ever could have imagined. And it happened pretty fast once her self-concept really shifted and solidified. So it's not just me, others experience this too. And so you absolutely can as well, if you're willing to do the work. Now, but given that I told you that it is hard work, you probably want to know, why even do this? Is it really worth it? Yes, it is. Because my patterns now are so different. I don't believe, by the way, in being fully healed, and I don't think you need to be fully healed in order to experience amazing things and experience what you want. In fact, I don't think it's possible to ever be fully healed. I feel like we're here in the school of life to do exactly that, to heal and expand and transform, and it's just that we choose how much we do that. So I'm obviously always healing things, because changing your self-concept is an ongoing journey and ongoing evolution. But these anxious attachment patterns I have broken, and I am confident of that. I see often that people are afraid that they fall into the same patterns again in the future, even when they've done so much work on themselves. But I can tell you, when it clicks into place, it clicks into place. There is no doubt that you will go back. I really trust myself in that department now. And I see it externally as well. My dating experiences are so different now. Instead of calling in emotionally unavailable people, I am attracting really conscious and intentional men. I've been having a lot of fun meeting new people. I've been feeling really confident and secure in myself. I've also been meeting men in ways that previously I didn't think would be possible, at least for me. Sometimes we can have this belief that it's possible for others, but not for us. But I've been meeting men in ways that are really serendipitous and that I thought couldn't happen to me. So there's been a real sense of magnetism that came along with that. And this has only really been manifested externally this year. And that's primarily because before this year, I chose to not date. I was dating myself, and I did that really intentionally for a few years. I'd actually done a bit of a pendulum swing from anxious to avoidant for a while. So this year, I got to heal a lot of my more avoidant attachment patterns. And now I feel really confident and secure and really open and really loving, but not triggered all the time. But transmuting this anxious attachment is something that I'm really grateful for and really proud of, because that pattern had followed me for decades. And that pattern had followed me all my life. And that has broken, that is gone. And you can do it too. So I'm curious, what are some relationship patterns that you keep experiencing or that you want to break? Let me know in the comments below. And next week, we're going to dive into why manifesting a specific person or trying to do so pretty much always backfires. So I'll see you next week.